So we will start soon. We are just waiting for people to connect. People are coming in. That's always great. Just waiting a few more seconds. And now we can start. And I would say good afternoon and welcome to the EPC policy dialogue called What to Expect from the German Government on Climate and Energy, jointly organized by Connecting Europe and EPC Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program. Connecting Europe, which is a joint project of EPC with Stiftung Mercator to connect civil society with EU's decision makers and EPC, a joint project. I am Melanie Fessler. I am a policy analyst at EPC, and I'm happy to moderate today's discussion. Before we start, some practicalities. After the introductory remarks by our three panelists, we are looking forward to engaging in a discussion with you and in a Q&A. To ask your questions, please already start writing them in the chat box. Remember to keep them short, please. But you can also raise your hand and ask your questions later in person. To start off, let me say a few words about our topic today. We are looking obviously at the new German government that took office in December 2021. And before the war in Ukraine, it committed to making the fight against climate change one of its priorities. However, even at that time, Berlin affirmed a strong stance in favor of gas as a transitional technology, for example, expressed in debates about the EU sustainable taxonomy or by holding on to its Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline project. While the Russian invasion of Ukraine has brought Nord Stream 2 to a halt, the German government, amongst other countries, has been very hesitant until now to support a full gas embargo against Russia. Since then, Germany tries to diversify its gas supplies while phasing out Russian gas imports only in the long term. In the meantime, Russia has already started to limit gas flows to Germany, and today the German government decided to escalate its warnings to alert level over security of gas supply. While considering these daily developments, today we would also like to focus on the bigger picture. What are the German government's plans on climate and energy, and what measures have been implemented so far? What are the implications of the war on Ukraine for accelerating the clean energy transition? And how does the German climate and energy agenda affect the EU's ambitions? What are Germany's positions on the European Green Deal, the Fit for 55 package, and also the recently published Repower EU plan? Therefore, I'm very happy that we have three speakers, three external speakers joining us today. We have Mathias Koch, policy advisor at E3G, Michaela Holl, project lead at Agora Energiewende, and Mateja, Kahmann, policy advisor at Germanwatch. Agora and Germanwatch are partners in our Connecting Europe network. And we also have Annika Hedberg, head of the Sustainable Prosperity for Europe program at EPC, who will react and bring in a non-German perspective to our discussion. So without further ado, I would give the floor to Mathias, who will talk about Germany's climate and energy agenda, the domestic perspective, with a focus on independence from Russian energy sources and how this relates to Germany's position in the EU. Mathias, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Melanie, and also thanks to EPC and Mercator for organizing this very timely discussion today. And yes, should we be alarmed? Maybe we will say a little bit about that later. There was obviously today already a new announcement, something new happening on the German energy front pretty much daily, but maybe let me take a few steps back. So the new not so new, relatively new German government, the traffic light coalition between the Social Democrats, the Greens, and the Liberals, gave itself a lot of ambition in its coalition treaty as regards climate and energy. It did not alter the climate goal of Germany itself, but there is a very strong push on meeting it. So, for example, the goal of 80% renewables in the power sector until 2030, that's doubling where we are today, while also calculating with higher power use. And this ambition, this is just one example, of course, is mirrored in the composition of the government, we saw that climate moved to the Energy and Economics Ministry, which is led by the Greens. Nevertheless, the Greens are only one of the three partners. And this also then mirrors when we look at concrete action. So I already mentioned this push for renewables, and there are some laws in the parliamentary process dedicating, for example, 2% of land area to wind, pushing back against individual German states that have distance rules in place for wind turbines. And much of that comes out of this green-led energy ministry. But then it gets a little bit more complicated in terms of climate ambition when we look at some of the other things that Germany has done in the last month. So one thing that is certainly to mention are energy subsidies to the extent of already 20 billion euros at this point. And it's pretty clear that there will be more this autumn. It's very interesting to note that the Green Energy Minister Habeck himself has said it was actually not the right thing to do at this point because it takes away the price signal. So that's a very frank assessment from the minister who partly is responsible for this action. And these subsidies are indeed very problematic because they encourage consumption precisely at the wrong moment. They're also regressive so that they don't actually help those that need it the most. And then, of course, the big thing that is on the German government's priority list right at the top is diversifying from Russian energy. So we know that Germany now is in support of a coal and oil embargo. And well, this has at least partly been enacted on the EU level. Already we know about the situation with Hungary and oil, of course. But then on the gas side, it's a lot more complicated for Germany. So gas is a very big part of the German energy mix, 30% in households and industry, and around 15% in power. And the current timeline of the German government is to say they want to phase this down, not out, until 2024. So they have not at this point actually given an end date to Russian gas use in Germany. Meanwhile, they're really pushing ahead with liquefied natural gas terminals, so an alternative source of gas. Germany does currently not have LNG import capacity. That's why it is so dependent on Russian gas. And the German government, and again, this comes from the Greens, this is really noteworthy, is pushing ahead very strongly, making money available, 3 billion for temporary terminals there on the German coast. And there, from a climate perspective, very important that this does not lead to permanent infrastructure there on the LNG side. And then now it has gotten a bit worse in terms of energy security from that perspective this week, with Russia cutting flows through Nord Stream by 60%. And now the German government is also looking to bring back some already decommissioned coal plants to help preserve gas over the coming months and to fill up the gas storages that are now around, I think, 58% filled, and they need to be filled. This is also a law now to 90% by November. So what is the big problem with what I've mentioned? I mean, coal, I think, is pretty self-evident. That's a very polluting energy source, of course. That is highly problematic. LNG, already said, there's a real danger that this leads into then permanent infrastructure, and this is not in line with really midterm gas use projections in Germany. What's critically missing at this point from our side is the question of demand reduction. So we are in a huge crisis. There is a war on Europe's borders. And as far as we can see, there is no serious attempt to curtail gas demand over the coming months. And then critically in winter, when gas consumption is much higher because of people are heating, of course. There are studies that show that from a technical perspective, we could cut gas demand by possibly 15 to even 20% in the near term. These would be measures that are hurtful. They're not easy to implement. Maybe we don't want to go there, but we should certainly try to do something. So maybe in the range of 10% of cutting gas demand. And the second big problem with this strategy that Germany is pursuing there is the signal that it sends to the world. So I already spoke about this domestic ambition that is actually quite good in terms of renewables. And there's a strong tension to the signal that is sent to the world when we are speaking about buying more LNG also in the midterms. Germany has already signed energy partnerships to that effect, for example, with the US and Qatar, and is in discussion with Canada and Senegal. And of course, investors that are looking to invest in LNG export capacity in these countries are very closely monitoring what Germany is saying and how it is posturing. And we see a strong mismatch between the actual climate ambition that Germany has on the domestic level, where we know that the gas consumption needs to go down in the midterm, and how it is portraying itself on the international scale. And that is a big problem that we are seeing. And maybe lastly, on the EU, we do think that there, but other speakers are perhaps more qualified to comment on this. We do see that Germany is ambitious, at least in some parts of the Fit for 55 packages, but also there, we believe that Germany should take this a lot more general, in a sense that they should go towards an EU joint buying rather than going it alone in terms of energy security. So I will stop there and look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Mathias, for these insights and for pointing out that the demand reduction is missing from the picture in German domestic policy. So let's go on, and please, Michaela, you have the floor. I'm looking forward to your view on the energy and climate agenda of Germany and how this affects EU policy such as the Green Deal.
Yeah, thanks so much for the invitation. I'm in the Brussels-based office, so despite my German name, I had to actually prepare a little bit to really be also on the fit on the German side, so to speak. I mean, Mathias, you did a perfect tour d'horizon already. I think you set it out super clearly what's going on. So I'll just comment here and there, and then indeed particular answer what it could mean for the EU. No? Mathias mentioned the coalition treaty that was signed at the beginning, which indeed was ambitious. So basically really turn around in all the negative trends, that the emissions were not decreasing, buildings, transport everywhere, and basically to change the slowdown trend on renewables. Mathias mentioned this 80% renewables target, a lot of reforms around that, which is interesting because there were no reforms, for example, in the recovery plan of the, unlike for other countries who included really, you know, like the Commission wanted, investment plus reform. There wasn't so much reform in the original recovery plan for Germany, but then actually with the first Easter package, a lot was coming around permitting, etc. And I think we see also those ideas around, you know, creating areas where renewables should go, so it's clear where you can build to create a pipeline, and better permitting, you know, repowering, because a lot of capacity comes out. We see these already have arrived on the EU level, like the Council yesterday agreed on a position on an approach for the to agree on a general approach, and you see those ideas have already landed at the EU level. But in Germany, I mean, we've heard it already in your introductory statement, Melanie. I think it will continue to be confusing because of the special Energiewende path that Germany has taken. So you rightly referred to the strong push of the German government on having gas investments in there. And I think these contradictions we will continue, and we see at the moment we will continue to be seeing them, because this coalition, I mean, we start to see more internal discussions there. You will remember, if not, you will not remember because you might not have read the coalition treaty, but there was a bold general statement in there that said, we as the German, so our coalition, we support the Fit for 55 legislation put forward for the Green Deal. Like bold, like this. But it's not that easy, and it will not continue to be that easy. You see it at the moment around the cars. So you know, one should not take this too literally. And I think as things continue, it is a little bit like what they always say about how the EU evolves, that the EU only makes the next step if it's confronted with a super crisis, like, you know, and it's in Germany, it's a little bit the same. Now that the gas flow is reduced, we start seeing finally measures on energy demand now coming in. Mathias rightly said there wasn't so much so far, which is true. but the discussions start now on having an auction scheme where basically you pay people for their pitch to reduce in industry. We see this, for example, as a very good idea. And in defense of the German government, there was so far not so much on energy efficiency in the legislative proposals they put forward, because they came out first with the ones where the economic and climate ministry was chef de file. So they need more time to sort out amongst the different ministries, you know, buildings, etc. There are other ministries coming in. This takes longer. So these packages come in autumn. So yeah, but I already said it will not be easy on all topics to see an agreement within this coalition, and I might conclude with that already. My first intro statement. For example, there was also a quite ambitious objective which reflected what the IEA in its net zero modeling had. That basically they said for industrialized economies, you would need a fully decarbonized power sector by 2035. And that ambition was also mentioned alongside the 80% we heard already, no? The 80% of renewables by 2030, and then fully decarbonized 5 years later. And for example, there are intense discussions around that now. This was also a point that the Germans wanted to push at the G7, which is taking place. But it's not 100% that actually domestically they would agree on this. So you see there's a lot of frictions and pressures. And then just the last thing, I think also, Mathias, you concluded with that a little bit. So Germany definitely pushing a lot for importing of hydrogen and other sources, because they know exactly they will not have enough space on their own territory. And I guess they kind of created, how do you say, fait accompli when they went already shopping before this joint purchasing platform of the EU is starting to take. The Germans already went around. And are also, I think, quite advanced in hydrogen supplies. And just yesterday I read, so in a way, Germany is setting the trend, whether the EU likes it or not, because for the past 20 years, the EU policy was, let's get away from long-term contracts. Yesterday, I read ENBV signed a 20 years contract on LNG. So somehow the Germans will, you know, continue to shape the discussion on these issues, I think, because they are just, given their vulnerability and their high exposure to Russian gas, maybe in the front line of these developments. I'll stop here. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Michaela. Also for reiterating the demand measures, that there is something coming. Maybe we can come back more in detail on that later. Also for mentioning the support of the German government for the Fit for 55 package, but pointing out the internal discussion that are already going on. Also, we could maybe see that more in detail later. So then I would pass on the word to Mateja and look forward to what she has to tell us about the German views on the Green Deal and Fit for 55 package and the discrepancies between the national and the EU agenda. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. So yeah, I think it would be worth looking a little bit more into detail on the Fit for 55 negotiations and how Germany is actually positioning itself. So we've heard that on domestic level, it looked quite good on the climate agenda, and I think my the colleagues working on national climate policy, so I mean, we can say there were quite some good decisions, and everyone has the impression that things are going in the right direction in most of the policies, but on EU level, it's a little bit different. So what we would have expected from Germany would be a little more engaged, like being a little bit more engaged in the negotiations, build ambitious coalitions, and maybe being more active and we don't really see that. It's not really reflecting, like the national dynamics, they're not really reflecting on the European level. And I think that's, Michaela has already said it, it's, we have some difficult discussions in the government. We have, we must not forget, yes, we have like a very interesting new coalition, but we also have a lot of ideological rifts between these parties. And this especially shows up, in our opinion now, or comes out now when we have a look at the Fit for 55 negotiations. So next week will be very important also for the Fit for 55 package, because the council will decide on its general approach before we come to the trilogue negotiations. And so there at the moment, it's like now really this week is really there are really tense discussions between the countries, with France, to find solutions, because what we see is, and what we see now and what we hear also from other countries, is that Germany is not very helpful. It's there are a few. I mean, they're definitely not helping when it comes to ambition, but they're even with some files, they're even blocking, or they even have a very negative, from our view, a very negative position. So to go a little bit more into detail, certainly a big priority of Germany was the ETS2. In the Fit for 55 package. And so Germany has already shocked a little bit the French presidency and the other countries with a new proposal on, but they were not accepting the Social Climate Fund, the proposal as it came from the Commission. So they were proposing a different solution, but it turned out that there was no real support for it. And so now they have a different position, which is much less ambitious than the Commission position. And even for the last 2-3 days, we were really afraid of Germany even blocking the proposal, and maybe that could also be like a really big chaos at the end for the whole Fit for 5 negotiation next week. We got some more positive signals right now, but we're very worried about the signals that Germany gives to the rest of the other member states, that they want this emission trading system for this difficult sectors, difficult abating sectors, but at the same time they're not ready to pay for it. They're not ready to help other countries, and this is, I think this is really, for the image of Germany right now, this is really difficult. And also the position they had now in Coreper last days, it was really like, I think 5% of these allowances should go to the Social Climate Fund. So it's much less than the Commission proposal. And it will be really interesting to see, and hopefully they will find an agreement. I think it would also be very bad for Franco-German friendship if Germany is the reason why the Fit for 55 general approach failed. I'm not that pessimistic right now, but it was certainly surprising for us to see this big difficulties from the German government. And this is due to, of course, we have a chancellor being a minister of finance, and the FDP as with the finance ministry. And it will be very, I must say, we very much hope for Germany leaving this group of the frugals a little bit, but we see the opposite happening right now. And of course, as you've mentioned with the cars, it's pretty much the same thing here, that for our reputation now, everyone is already saw that we've been accepting it in from March, and now there's some more discussion about it in Germany. So we really see there's lots of difficulties with the German positions right now. And also some dossier which is always often forgotten is the effort sharing regulation or climate action regulation, where Council will now is about to adapt a less ambitious position than the Commission proposal. And we really thought that this at least would be a file where Germany could play a positive role and could push for a more ambitious position. But yeah, this is not going to happen. So and the Council, and this is for us, of course, very complicated. We've seen that the Commission, for us, the Commission proposals are already not aligned with 1.5 degree, and with the Council proposal, the Council positions will be even less ambitious. So there was this. But maybe as a last thing, there was this statement by 10 member states about that Germany is, that we are afraid of the Fit for 5 package, 55 package to be weakened. And there's, from our point of view, there's such a big discrepancy between this statement and how they actually behave in the Council negotiations. And also, speaking about the coalition treaty, for us stating we will support the Commission proposal is something different than what they actually do at the moment on the European level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mateja, also for going already a little bit deeper on the internal discussions and showing us your assessment that the internal coalition discussions are actually hindering Germany from being ambitious also on the EU level, unfortunately. Yes, now I would like to give you the opportunity to also, if you want to react on what you have already said. Is there somebody who would like to go first, or Annika, would you like to come in now? Yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mathias, Michaela, and Mateja, for your reflections. I thought that maybe I could bring in 3 points to the discussion and focus on past, present, and the future when it comes to Germany's decisions, choices, and responsibilities on climate action and energy transition. And this is also for the sake of debate. I hope to create some discussion here. First, Germany obviously carries an enormous responsibility when it comes to the state of EU's energy security today. We see that despite all the given warnings, especially in the last decade, rather than reducing EU's dependence on Russian energy, the opposite has happened, and Germany carries a major responsibility for this. And we can see that the German Energiewende was always driven by one main goal: to phase out nuclear at any cost. And as such, it failed to combine the goals of climate action, energy security, and affordable energy for people. And it is these costs that are paid now, not only by Germans, but also by other Europeans. And as we've been already hearing today, is that one of the main outcomes of German Energiewende was this increased thirst for gas from Russia. And we now know where this has led us. But the reality is that while Germany insisted on separating politics and security from economic relations with Russia, it engaged in commercial dealings, which came at the expense of Europe's energy and overall security. And just to remind us, when talking about the past, a good example, a telling example of this has been and was Germany's aggressive push for Nord Stream gas pipeline, which for years was an enormous tension point within the EU, vis-a-vis Ukraine and the US. It really raised serious geopolitical, political, and security, including energy security concerns, since it was launched. And you could say that it was hardly in line with EU's climate objectives either. So certainly there is these examples from the past which show that Germany has done or has taken serious measures which have contributed to undermining EU's energy security as a whole. Now, obviously, while Germany, with these measures, was playing into Putin's hands, it hasn't been the only one doing that. However, it does carry a special responsibility for mistakes done and undermining EU's energy security and EU security from within. As a second point, Russian war in Ukraine, obviously it's a defining moment for the EU, for Germany, The age of naivety should be over. It should be clear now for all that energy and politics cannot be separated when it comes to Russia. And Germany and the EU as a whole should have learned the hard way not to put all energy eggs in one basket. But most importantly, I would like to stress that we are in a war and our leaders should act accordingly. Germany has a moral responsibility to stop subsidizing Putin's war with its fossil fuel imports, and it should have an economic, humanitarian, and security interest to help Ukraine win this war. So this is a true test case for the German government in power. Now, Germany will not be judged only for the mistakes done, but also for what they do now and what they do tomorrow to stop Putin and help Ukraine win. And I think that's what we really need to get across is that EU leaders, including in Germany, must step up their efforts to explain to their people that ending this war, achieving peace, and ensuring European prosperity requires short-term sacrifices and that these can be managed. So be it by reducing speed limits or car usage, this is actually a little price to pay compared to what the war is already costing Ukraine and will cost Europe if Russia gets its way. So what I would like to get across in Germany, as well as in the other countries, is that we need leaders to communicate clearly that if we fail to take needed measures now, including when it comes to energy, this will prolong the pain and come with devastating consequences. And I think Mathias already mentioned this as well, that this urgency seems to be missing in the discussion at the moment. Third point, whether we're talking about the short-term, medium, or long-term measures on climate and energy, there should be no doubt about the direction of travel. If we look at the energy system's central role in driving the planetary crisis, and this system's importance also for economic and societal well-being, it's critical to ensure that the measures we take today lead to no regrets. So what we need desperately is an accelerated transition to clean energy system that builds on energy savings, energy efficiency, and renewables. And as Mathias said, there should be much greater urgency to push for demand-side measures. And a green and ambitious Fit for 55 package is more urgent than ever. Moreover, we need collaboration. The EU is stronger than the sum of its parts, but only if the EU27 act together. And I often find that Germany hasn't yet fully recognized its responsibility and interest as part of the EU to ensure that the measures it takes contribute to EU's climate action and energy security. We need domestically produced clean energy to enhance not just national, but European energy security, and to continue efforts to decarbonize electricity production, heating, transport, and industry. And this means that every member state, including Germany, that has functioning nuclear power plants should be looking into extending their usage. Even if this is politically difficult, closing nuclear power at this point makes no sense. And as Mathias mentioned, EU collaboration on gas deals with third countries. Germany should be going for joint buying rules. We should be collaborating on this. And a last point, we need all member states to collaborate in creating an energy market for renewables, and everyone must play their and contribute to these efforts, including Germany. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Annika. And I see already Mathias wants to say something. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much. I thought great points from all the speakers. I wanted to continue where Annika has just left it and bring this a bit towards exactly how this is playing out in Germany, because these are such important points. And I would perhaps start with a very general observation, which is very important, which is about the standing of Germany in the EU, and Germany, I believe, can be a leader for positive progress in the EU, but that depends on a certain amount of leadership credibility. And there is no doubt that Germany has lost this significantly over the last months or so. And that has to do with, and this was absolutely rightly explained by the others, about this position that the EU is now in, and that has to a large extent to do with how Germany has pursued its energy policy. So now it is really for Germany, and it's in the interest of Germany, but also in the interest of the EU as a whole, that Germany regains its leadership credibility. And there are some positive aspects, and I did mention that, and I think it is important that on some fronts, and for example with renewables, Germany is doing quite well. So it's I believe, ultimately about managing the tension between how to react to this short-term crisis and then not have that jeopardize the good paths that have been taken that could, of course, be more ambitious on climate action overall. So starting with the short-term sacrifices that are needed, this is how Annika put it, and I think that is so important. And yes, these are demand cuts, and Germany is just not doing enough, and this was also a question in the chat. So we have now an auctioning system in place for industry in Germany, but there are no details yet that lead me to believe that this will really lead to industry significantly cutting its demand, even though we know that this is possible to an extent. Then also we need to understand now gas consumption is much lower in the summer. So now would be a time to prepare measures that would then take effect in winter. And this would also, of course, be a societal approach that needs to be taken. And so we at E3G like to call this flattening the curve. And it's not incidental that we use a term that was that we know from COVID, because we also think this is something where everyone has to play their part. And by pulling together, we can achieve something. So this famous 1 to 2 degrees centigrade of heating, but it needs to be equitable. And this is why we think that the government needs to play a very strong role in this, in mandating this, so that it's not just up to voluntary contributions from individuals that want to contribute. We think that is great, and this is what the German government seems to be building on now. We think that this needs to be mandatory. And then looking a bit more, again, exploring this tension between short-term and then long-term, it's absolutely critical that any short-term measure that we take that don't lead to lock-ins, and it's very delicate, but we need to limit as much as is possible the buildup of new infrastructure of LNG, and that's why we think that thinking this in a European context is so critical, so that Germany really does not go it alone as it appears to be doing now, both with infrastructure but also with energy partnerships, but rather goes into the EU space with this. And this is why this joint platform is very important, not because we as a climate think tank are in favor of gas purchases, but if we see that when we do these demand side measures, we still realize that it's not enough. And we realize maybe there is space for 1 or 2 floating terminals and some LNG purchases, that happens in a coordinated manner where we have clear projections. We send a clear signal to the international markets that this will only be for a few years maximum. And this can best happen through a coordinated EU effort. So that is very important. And then maybe very last point, nuclear, that is of course a very difficult topic in Germany. And we do indeed see this coming up again. So we believe that the German government has actually looked at this and has just realized that that poses technical difficulties that are too great. And this seems to be the position that the German government is defending. But now there are indeed voices in the government that are questioning this again. We think ultimately, again, this is a bit of a distraction from the wins that we can have that would be much larger if we focused on measures to cut gas demand through accelerated roll of heat pumps, insulation, so forth, what I already mentioned. We should really be focusing on that before we talk about nuclear, coal, or LNG.
Thank you very much. Any reactions to that right away? If not, then maybe we could go a little bit back in time and have a look on why Germany was so slow to agree on the oil sanctions. And what do you think would be the prospects to get Germany to stop sponsoring the Russian war with its gas imports? What are the difficulties and how should these obstacles be overcome? Yes, Mathias, please.
Yeah, just very quickly, I already spoke for a few minutes. Obviously, also keen to hear from the other speakers, but just very quickly on this oil situation, there was something indeed where we felt that where we initially thought, and the initial timelines that were communicated from the German government were in fact a lot longer than what it then actually took. So initially they said it would take them a year or more to get independent from oil, and now this is happening a lot more quickly. The main obstacle was in fact one refinery on the German-Polish border, the refinery that supplies the Berlin region with fuels, and this refinery is only connected to a pipeline to Russia, and there was a real question how crude oil could get to that pipeline. Obviously, if it supplies the Berlin region, that is a critical piece of infrastructure there. There isn't the option of shutting this off, let's say. So eventually the German government found a solution together with Poland so that crude oil could get to this refinery, and that eventually then put them in a position to agree to the oil embargo. And indeed we see that the discussion around the oil embargo then immediately picked off once Germany signaled that it would support this. On gas, I do not see this coming at all. I think it's much too difficult now with Russia supplying even less through Nord Stream 1. We now had, I only mentioned this briefly before, we now have this alert status on gas, which is the second of 3 stages in terms of gas emergency in Germany. So the German government is keenly aware that it's at a point where, and they also published some scenarios today that said there is now real possibility that Germany will actually get close to running out of gas in the upcoming winter. And I also personally believe that Russia has calculated this very well and cut the gas supply exactly to that point of just making it so that it may still be enough in an effort simply to get as much revenue out of the EU as possible, to sort of keep the EU and Germany hooked so that they don't from their side walk away, which they might do if Russia cut it even further, but still inflicting as much damage as possible. I personally don't see how Germany is in a position to be completely independent of Russian gas in the near term. But yeah, in terms of how to get there, maybe over the course of these 12 months, we really think that the only way that they even put themselves in a position to then maybe at the end of next winter to walk away from Russian gas would be to cut demand as much as possible and have an emergency package ready that sets everything in motion that we can, so that we just use as little gas as possible. And we don't see that emergency spirit quite yet.
Thank you. Annika, you wanted to add?
Yeah, fully agree with Mathias's evaluation of the situation. I'm extremely worried that what we seem to be doing, and this is across the EU, is that we seem to be on a path of prolonging the pain. So what we've seen with the oil sanctions and with the gas sanctions, even not to be discussed at the moment, but the idea that when we are going for a gradual phase out of Russian energy, and not only in the course of this year, but this idea of over the next years, this actually gives Russia time to look for alternative buyers, which in turn reduces the EU's decision's shock effect. And if we take now the current and rising oil and gas prices in practice, even if the actual volumes of imports decrease, the EU member states continue their horrendous financial support for Kremlin's war machine. And this is exactly what Putin is counting for. And then combined with the measures that the member states are taking within their borders to subsidize, for example, for fossil fuel usage or cutting taxes, this is not only expensive for taxpayers, it actually encourages consumption, which again increases demand and dependence on Russian fossil fuels. So we really are causing much more harm for ourselves by prolonging the pain rather than really going full steam ahead. For example, energy savings, demand reduction, and getting that urgency and that wartime mentality across that this is exceptional times and we need to take exceptional measures to actually address this crisis.
Thank you. Yes, Michaela, please.
Since we all seem to agree a little bit on our panel on all the things that are not ideal in Germany, maybe if I would like to I mean, we all agree on this energy demand coming in too late, but frankly, that was not only a German specificity. If I look back at the first draft of the repower strategy that the Commission published in March, energy's demand reduction was almost absent. It was literally not there. And it was then also encouraged by the dialogue with the International Energy Agency, who published these 10-point plans on oil and gas. Then there was a joint meeting between the IEA and Commission, which resulted in, I think it was even open for the public, how was it, play my part or something. And then there were recommendations, which then resulted in the new plan. Okay, at least in the structure of the document, it was even ranked as one, but there was a bit more substance, even if not fed with money, I should say. Repower EU does not give any money to these kind of parts. The only money that is for certain was for LNG and other things, one should say that. But I mean, this was not only a German phenomenon. And it's true, I mean, we've said it already, all of us, and I couldn't agree more. There were very early on a lot of analysis, Bruegel, Agora, everyone, IEA, looking at this, and it is, I don't know, I still find it absolutely amazing that the convergence of two crises, decarbonization and getting off Russian gas, does not even lead to policy people to put energy efficiency, which can serve both purposes up front. And that rather the old recipes of we need to substitute come back. And I also believe that it was not only Germany, obstructing earlier pushes for. I think some member states were also conveniently hiding behind. Let's also say that. I think it was, obviously, I totally agree. Germany would have a weight and has not used it. I totally agree, and has lost a lot of its leadership, no doubt about that. But frankly, I think it's very often also that some member states find it very good to be in the, hiding behind and happy not to fight this. On nuclear, difficult topic, but I would totally agree with what Mathias said. I think it distracts. I agree, if you can have nuclear running, but I think the nuclear exit in Germany was already way too advanced. It was really already in the making, so it's difficult to bring things back. But I agree, any pressure you would have on peak price formation, because the marginal unit in power everywhere is gas, and in order to reduce that, you can have the gas then instead in the storage. It might probably make sense. Belgium is going along those lines. But let's also not forget that a huge part of this, why this is hitting us so hard, was also the French nuclear fleet completely down for months. This was also adding additional pressure. So it was, the Russian blackmailing, but this was actually also happening exactly at the same time. So that didn't help either. Yeah, and then just one point on the which I agree will be difficult. It was talked about the solidarity with money also. I also at the moment don't see. I mean, we've just published a study from Agora on which where we called for a 100 billion fund, and basically what we did in one chart, we added up all the green funding, including recovery and social climate fund, which is not even certain, but we included everything. And you see there is a big gap. I mean, if a member state is supposed to spend 1.5% of its GDP on green, has debt levels, it's inevitable. At some point, there has to be put money on the table. And it is in particular highly indebted countries that actually are responsible for a lot of climate. And there's also an equity element in there, in that probably Germany is big going into these carbon contracts for difference for its industry. They can pay whatever, but the Italians will then not be able to do that in a similar way. There's also kind of, is this still a level playing field element of it, which I think is very important, that Germans can probably pay whatever they want in that respect. So I think this should also not be forgotten, but I don't see it at all at the moment with the difficult internal discussions. It was already said they're very different ideologies, and in Germany in particular, this idea to come again with something like recovery fund to, fund getting out of two crises at the same time. I don't see it at the moment. I really don't see it at the moment, unfortunately.
Thank you, even for ending on a negative note. Anyone wants to directly comment on that? Otherwise, I would have a question from the chat. No, please, if you want to add on Michaela, go ahead, Mateja.
Yes, so I would be keen to know what you or the participant here would think about. Why is Germany not being more ambitious on European level? Because with this filed, and even with Repower, we don't see that they have been welcoming it in the council, I think, but that's all. Like, we haven't really seen like any more positive reactions from the German government, and we really know also they're really hesitant about higher renewable and energy efficiency targets. And so what I'm thinking about is this kind of past dependency. So we've been, I think about it as maybe even the ministries, they have forgotten how this works, how to be a climate leader, and as everyone is focusing also on the domestic situation, there's obviously not much appetite. And of course, it's the Chancellery and it's also the liberals who are blocking a lot, but we also don't see the Greens fighting for it more. So so maybe if you have any ideas on this, that would be really helpful.
What I've come to understand from several leaders at the moment, and also within the Commission, it's just this short-term managing the crisis. How do we get through the next winter? So this is so dominant, and I recall Patrick, who is the state secretary, used to be our director, right? He was in a podcast talking relatively freely last week, and he said, listen, it's not what we would have wanted. We really need to sort out next winter. That's what we put the people on. We have only so many resources. It's sad. It's not what we had planned, but that's how it is. And I see a little bit the same in the Commission. You saw directly this reorientation of people into this joint gas task force, whereas, I used to be there. I know that you had to work with a very narrow tableau of resources for years on renewables and energy efficiency, while things were more and more responsibilities came, but the staff did not increase. However, and then you see the political pressure when they instantly reacted with this new task force to set it up. I just think that, and it's understandable. I think I don't want to be in this position to be managing this country. I think it's just so to manage these next few months and also the winter, which is already coming in terms of purchasing, because it means you're buying now. We talked already about it, probably at horrendous prices these days, all set up for us. But I think it's just this, we cannot have no supply anymore, or maybe at the EU level we cannot get into a situation where we have to decide who gets what and who gets some gas and who gets not. I guess that might play it's understandable, I guess, from a certain point of view. And I think that so somehow implicitly the coal coming back, etc. So it's like, okay, we admit for 2 or 3 years we take a pause, but then we catch up later. This kind of, we'll put it a little bit on hold, and then we come back later. But we probably all don't like to hear that. But I think that's a little bit how it sounds to me. What is being done at the
Thank you. Anyone wants to add? Yes, Annika.
I think, and this goes for Germany, but it does go for the other member states as well. I feel that there is not enough courage in our current leadership to lead the people. I saw a survey, this is already months old, so maybe the public opinion has changed significantly in Germany between this time. But I saw that surveys have been done where people show great support for energy embargo against Russia, have called for faster and deeper shift to renewable energies, have been accepting of reducing speed limits. And to me, what leadership does is that it builds on already this kind of an existing support when taking needed measures. Leadership has the courage to tell people that these are exceptional times. There is an urgency, there is a war, and we need to mobilize societies. We need to mobilize people, the industry to play their role. And I just find, and Mathias mentioned this already several times, this urgency is missing. And that's what I find is that it's, especially in Germany, at the moment, it is as if business as usual can continue. It is as if, yes, we'll just try to find a way to manage this, rather than going to the people and telling that, unfortunately, business as usual will be extremely costly. We cannot afford it, and we need to prepare already now for the coming winter and take whatever measures we can to take now to actually manage the short-term implications.
So do we have any idea how we could communicate? Because Annika, you already referred to the tempo limit, and I have to say I start laughing every time this comes up. It starts to become like a topic, like when we look at the US with the weapons, you know, like everyone is like, what is the problem? Don't they see it? But, you know, everyone else, but inside you cannot solve it, you know? So I don't know what, I think it's difficult. I mean, frankly, if you send me now out to Germany and say, okay, tell them, it's a little price to pay, I'm not sure I would be any better. And I agree, the campaign on energy saving that we've seen in Germany a few weeks ago wasn't impressive. But frankly, I'm not sure I have a recipe of doing it any better. I don't know, but I totally agree with you. I think this idea of how much waste there is in the system, and that you don't have to only build, but there's actually so many things you can do. Tweets here, electrical heat pumps in industry. Don't let low temperature users use gas. But once you put them on the table, the reaction is like, ooh, that's going a bit far. Are you sure we need that? I know. But I don't know. I haven't found the way of communicating it so that people are like, oh yeah, we get this. That makes a lot of sense. Let's do that. It's not so easy.
Please, Mathias, come in.
Yeah, I'll take one step back. I think in terms of optimism that we have that such a course that, and a more ambitious course, let's say, in the short term as well, not just in terms of 2030 targets or something, but also how to deal with this crisis is possible. We also, I think, need to understand, and I'm all for such a course, to be clear, but we need to understand we're coming out of a crisis where in all European countries, people have gone through a lot of suffering and stress and lost loved ones, lost jobs, and had to deal with personal hardship. And a course that is more ambitious in diversifying from Russian fossil fuels through cutting demand, some of that is no regret and some of that is win-win, and we should be clear on that. But some of it will be not. It will be hurtful and harmful for some people in the short term. I personally strongly believe that this can be mitigated, and there can be social measures that cushion that, and that is an absolute key aspect of whenever we say this is something that we need to say immediately, that this is necessary. We cannot just have some people go into short-term work or not have their heating on. So that is absolutely key. That seems to be the problem, that this sort of this very whole of society approach that is needed, and also with social measures attached to it, is just maybe too big an ask, and that seems to be the problem from my vantage point. But one of the things that we will now try to work on E3G will be also to say, well, it is not only extremely important for geopolitical reasons that we do this, for climate reasons, of course, and we should always keep stressing that. But it is also ultimately in our own economic self-interest. So it is absolutely false to presume that LNG will be just a one-to-one replacement for the Russian gas that we will now not have. This will almost most likely be a much more expensive commodity in the midterm, and this price ultimately will be paid. So then the question is just who will pay this price. Ideally, we keep this price, this bill that comes as small as possible by now taking more assertive steps. That essentially means front-loading expenditure in terms of energy efficiency and perhaps also subsidizing demand cuts. But that will then help us to be on a pathway to much more affordable energy from renewables. But again, that's a big political ask, and it just appears that we're not getting there in Germany. And we see this, and I will finish my thought with this. We see this between the coalition partners. So the Liberals are very much fiscally conservative, and that is something we see play out in Germany now. Again, big debate around the debt brake, which limits German fiscal space. But then also Germany is enormously influential on the fiscal side in Europe. And with the Liberals holding the finance ministry, that is going to be a big ask, convincing Germany to do differently. I think that we have all the right arguments to make that case. I said geopolitical climate, but also ultimately cost benefit in the midterm. But it requires a big step forward in the short term from the German government, and probably much the same can be said about other EU member states.
Yes, Annika.
Thanks. Maybe just to add a few points on communication. I think obviously there's the positive way and then kind of the negative, building on the fear way of communicating. I think and International Energy Agency really puts it really well that there are a number of what we could say win-win measures, often looking at the demand side measures, which can help not only reduce energy bills, enhance energy security, but also reduce supply risks and bring wider societal benefits by boosting public health, well-being through cleaner air, reduced noise pollution, improved road safety, etc. So there's a lot of positives that these measures can bring already in a short and medium term. But then also, I do think that leadership must start to build on fear. The fact is, and it's not just mobilizing on fear, but the fact is that if we do not take these measures now, things will get much worse. And this is not going to mean just more costs, higher costs for people. This will mean, and now I'm also referring to the ongoing war, the fact is that as long as we continue to sponsor this war, this will mean that the cost, the humanitarian cost, the economic cost of rebuilding Ukraine, these are going up. It means that there will be more and more refugees coming into Europe. And the societal, the economic pressure continues to increase in Europe. And we are only taking the first steps in addressing some of these challenges at the moment, and these will continue to accumulate. So it is recognizing and being frank about the urgency and the fact that the world is and our lives are going to get much, much worse if we do not act now. And I think that it's worth to recognize that the kind of prosperity that we have learned to expect, this is not on the cards anymore. If we do not manage this crisis at the moment, if Russia gets what it wants in Ukraine, this will actually have already in a medium and longer term enormous impacts for European security, prosperity. Europe will not be the same again. We will not have the prosperity that we have learned to take for granted. And it is time for the leadership to build on this fear, to get people to mobilize and take action now. But then I think it was Mathias who, for example, referred to it. At the same time, it is essential that people are supported in this transition. Obviously, everyone is affected, but there are obviously people, some that are affected even more, and they will need targeted support for that. We know that there are vulnerable people that have, for example, when it comes to energy efficiency, energy demand measures, they have already learned to save energy because they need to try to find ways to save money. And they are especially these vulnerable people that are already living in energy poverty. The situation is only going to get worse, and we need to find ways how we support them in this transition. And unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of wrong measures being taken. We're seeing that actually what our leadership tends to be doing is throwing more money at the problem by subsidizing fossil fuel consumption, rather than actually take measures to reduce this consumption and provide targeted support for the more vulnerable. So if countries truly wish to help the low and middle income families in the short term, what they should be looking into is providing emergency income support via consumption checks or reduced labor taxes. And maybe also what we should be seeing is putting in place minimum income schemes to really support people. So it is this recognition that we need to take also these social measures to support the people in this transition, because certainly this is hitting people very greatly.
I mean, I have to say in this respect, what the EU put on the table, Fit for 55, Mateja, you referred to it. No, I actually think the package was balanced, you know, in a kind of, okay, here's regulation, here we have financial support in the climate fund, and then we have a carbon price. I think it was a very carefully balanced package for. But you see it, you know, it's difficult to keep a bird's eye view on everything. But I mean, it's weekend here, it's weekend there, it's weekend there. Then there's no ETS, then there's no money, and yeah, that's a little bit how it looks at the moment. I mean, it's not catastrophic yet, but I think it already adds up to quite less ambition. And there was actually I remember there was actually a comment in the chat about the GHG impact, which I thought we should also pick up. I should say I'm not aware of a study of that type. What always was the assumption is that the overall emissions, if you go in more coal in the medium term, the cap in the ETS will regulate it eventually, and then basically you just have to do more work at the end. So it's this idea that I developed before. If we take a short break, inshallah, and then we have this proposal from the Commission because they don't get money anywhere else, and they think, oh, what can we use? Let's use these parked allowances. The worst idea of all, which obviously doesn't help in this respect. Yeah. So I don't know if any one of the other panelists has a greater idea of. But it's obvious that this in the short term it's not helping. Yeah.
I'll just quickly come in. In a second, I just read out the question that was posted in the chat for everybody to understand. It said, what will be the climate impact for EU and Germany due to the Ukrainian war? A new ICIS analysis from today expects an increase of emissions in the power sector by as much as 20% and in Europe by 4 to 5% in 2023 and 2024 if 10 watt supplies or reserves really replace gas in the power mix. And please go ahead, Mateja.
Yes, so I just wanted to underline that I think it's really important to keep up the message that Fit for 5 is one of our tools also to the current crisis, and that it's really important to find really good compromises in the current negotiations. And I'm really much afraid that, as you've been saying quite often, is that these short-term measures, they request all the attention from a lot of member states, and that the bigger debate about how we need to adjust the European climate instruments in the next 5 to 10 years, that this is a little bit, off topic right now, but it's the negotiations are happening right now, and it's really difficult to let this topic aside a little bit more. And for the financing missing finance, I think this will be a really big issue in the next years. So when like repower is, I think there is some like around 500 million discrepancy between what they suggested and what will be needed. So this and nobody knows where the money will come from. And with this current discussion, it's even worse. I mean, yeah, so this is, I think we will need a really big discussion at European level about where the finance come from. And as Michaela said, the idea of selling more ETS allowances from the MSR is really, from our perspective, like the baddest idea they could have. But this is also showing how desperate they are, maybe.
Please, Mathias, come in.
Just adding one thought, which is that because we've now elaborated a lot our criticism, and I think that many points have been raised that are very important, and in terms of political ask and how to deal with this crisis. But for us, it's also always very important to keep in mind that we need to give also some credit to the extent that it's due. And this is following up on what you said, Mateja, that so not losing sight of the Fit for 55 package, and also looking at what is in there that is good, and similar things can be said about repower. And we always also, of course, with the question where it needs to be improved, and we see many spaces where this can be improved on repower. For example, the international dimension. I said this before as well about Germany's international posturing, but still, nevertheless, also say, for example, and this is also how I started my initial comment, saying, nevertheless, there are things that are going in the right direction, and we need to make sure that also there is no backtracking on that, and ideally this is implemented, and this is even furthered. And so in Germany, with the renewables rollout, takes time, is not suitable to help the crisis, and we said what is needed there, but nevertheless also bringing that in, because I think that is also always very important for us to say this is the EU. We also seen as it's important that the EU is on track. It's equally important also that other countries, other regions of the world have faith in the EU in being a climate leader. And this is extremely important. So I just wanted to bring this thought element in. And this is particularly also why we are quite worried about the international strategy around repower, which deals very much with security of supply of gas and oil, and much less, for example, in other things that the EU could do. For example, lead global demand reduction in gas globally by engaging, for example, with other big buyers, Korea, Japan, and China. So the international dimension is very important.
Yeah, or also to add on that, when the US came for help, and there was this task force set up between the EU and US, okay, we'll help you with LNG, and it would be such a wonderful platform if the mandate were a bit expanded, and the US and EU would look at, I don't know, what could we do to play our roles as world leaders, and decide, for example, on addressing the carbon embedded in our steel and cement production, go ahead and establish quotas, work together on embodied energy. There would be tons of ideas that one could do. But I would also agree not all is bad. I mean, for example, since Russia, since Russia's second invasion, I mean, the announcements that came in on a weekly basis of who else wants to phase out with fossil boilers everywhere. You couldn't speak about this a year or 2 years ago. I mean, you could not mention it. There were discussions on whether it's compatible within the internal market to do something like that, So this is quite amazing. And Germany, with its new, the 60% rest share in heatings, that will be basically part of, there will be more provisions to establish more at the energy efficiency part, as I said, in autumn. This is quite ambitious. Or what's going on heat pumps upscaling in several member states. So these are really it's a little bit like the transport sector with the e-cars. All of a sudden, you see some things that start to develop, and it's like it was said, it's important that those are not cut short. But there is actually good stuff also. And yesterday, one of my colleagues actually tweeted, I mean, the price signal works. The German gas consumption compared to the May of last year is down by 14%. So it does work. There's a chance in every crisis.
Yes, please, Annika.
Just a few unrelated thoughts. But first of all, on the global climate action, I can't but agree with Mathias on that importance, and also with Michaela on that importance to keep these discussions alive. And what Mathias was mentioned about the demand reduction on a global effort. This goes very much in line also what the International Energy Agency was saying, is that ultimately this obviously it's international efforts that will be needed in that regard. So EU together should be playing a much greater role in actually ensuring that these measures are being taken also elsewhere. And it's very interesting to look at also the lessons of history when we're looking at what kind of measures could be taken, not only in Europe, but also beyond. And to take this piece from the 1970s oil crisis, or look at what Japan did after Fukushima, when they had to take emergency measures to reduce energy consumption. So it is very interesting to look at these solutions and to look at also good practices, what has worked where, as we are trying to design measures, not only for Europe, but also engaging discussion globally. And then when it comes to kind of on the positive side, my hope is indeed, I think that we have been criticizing a lot, and we've been saying a lot kind of what should be done differently and what could be done differently. My hope is that obviously behind the closed doors, so much more is happening. And that while we recognize that, I think sadly so, I think definitely we should have been talking about gas sanctions already since the start of the war. I think that it is humiliating for Europe that we continue to sponsor this war and that we continue to import Russian gas and pay for the gas. Political realities, however, clearly suggest that it is very difficult to expect that we would be seeing Germany, maybe also others, to engage in negotiations on sanctioning gas, or that these would be extremely difficult negotiations. But so my hope is that behind the closed doors, however, we are seeing accelerated efforts in Germany to put in place plans to actually prepare for the fact, obviously it's already happening, that gas imports will be reduced, but then also for Germany to take the measures to really accelerate reduction of this vulnerability and dependency on Russian gas. And my assumption is that a lot is happening, and I hope that within a few months we will get an announcement, but it's maybe it is hopeful thinking, but I'm hoping that we would be getting an announcement from Germany in due course, where they actually surprise us all positively, how they have come up with a plan, how this transition and reduction of that dependency will be reduced much faster than what has been suggested so far. And I do think that across the EU, obviously there are a lot of good examples when it comes to heat pumps, for example, on banning fossil fuel-based boilers, etc. We see that these kind of measures are being taken on regional levels, if not agreed yet by different member states. So it is also, this is why it's so important for us also to look beyond our borders and look at what others are doing, learn from those, take those ideas, implement those at home. And just to finish off again, the importance for Germany to recognize that only if it works together with the rest of the EU member states will it have the kind of impact it wants to have for enhancing its own energy security and ultimately also achieving its own climate goals. It does need to work together with its neighbors. And this is something that we desperately need Germany to do much more on: collaborate, coordinate, work with the neighbors because if we have 27 member states going on their own path and doing bilateral deals and putting their, I would say, short-sighted national interest ahead of the common interest, it will only harm us all.
Thank you very much, Annika. And this is already pointing us to the last question I would also want to ask all of you, which is what are the next steps you would expect or wish the German government will or should take on climate and energy? So anything you would like to add on that in order to, as we are coming close to the end of our discussion, please just feel free to say.
Well, I can go.
Yes, of course.
This on time. Well, we've already said on renewables, there was this push. I mean, really, all of the EU has to get to a pace 2.5 times faster. For Germany, it's actually even higher. And I think there are really credible steps undertaken. This permitting discussion has landed at the EU level. What I would hope for is, because that's not everything, and what I would hope for is then, because I think in Germany also discussions have started about grid deployment, because they had all these bottlenecks, and that is also one by one you can put that on the EU level, that the grid is not developing at the same speed. Germany has already implemented this idea of zero carbon grid. And in Germany also there will be a discussion around the power market design, but anyhow, this discussion has been launched already by other member states. But in Germany, what seems to be in particular is this issue that it's, they need more geographical signals, and maybe because it will be organized as a sort of a discussion process around the Bundestag or something. I don't recall exactly the wording. But this could potentially lead actually to a very positive outcome, first for Germany, where you talk about what are the grid needs. There's also a lot of public resistance to this. And then inform also the market design discussion, which kind of was launched after the energy crisis. And the Commission tried to respond several times, but it's in a way still there. It's still there. So I think that would be an issue. And I do think that... we'll have to see, but Germany is advanced in this. We are dependent on imports, be it from the south of Europe or from outside. Even though there was also ambiguous wording in the coalition treaty, I have an impression that there is a willingness really to be clear about those imports being based on green hydrogen, and really this understanding that Germany used to plan with having, gas-based hydrogen interim for its heavy industry, but they are aware this bridge solution will not be there. I think this awareness is very much there. So I would hope that this perspective from Germany also can have a positive influence on the EU discussion, because this is one of the hot topics, as we all know, here in the EU at the moment. Thanks.
So for the European perspective, what we would like to see for the next steps is, of course, an ambitious general approach. So I think there are 3 scenarios. So maybe they will be asserting leadership, and they will integrate key element even of Repower EU in the deal, and to have like a tax stronger than the European Commission. But that would be our ideal solution, that we have progress on creating fiscal space and social measures. And this would also be a really important signal for like business, market, citizens, to see that there's really decisive action and ownership from the governments, and that also international partners see EU stepping up ambition and actual delivery. So that would be our, the ideal solution. And it's important it would also bring that message, the key message, make it more popular again, that the Green Deal and the Fit for 5 package is the best way to cut the EU's fossil fuel dependency. and that ministers really can walk the talk right now. And so that would be really important for us. So also speaking about the files, like really having an ambitious ETS and an ambitious position regarding less free allocation for industry, use that money instead for more allowances to be sold for investments, have a strong and a powerful social climate fund, also to spread the idea of solidarity again between the European countries. And finally, of course, the effort sharing regulation. I mean, the Fit for 5 package is about 16 or 17 files, but I think these, and together with, of course, renewable and higher energy efficiency targets. So this would be a really important step next week. And so, yeah, I think it's on Tuesday and Wednesday, and then we know, yeah, where we're going to with the trilogues.
I can go next, Annika, if that is okay with you. Then I would give you hand you the last word. So from Mateja already said it so well. What is needed on Fit 55? That is, I think, what's now happening in the short term and very critical. And then I just wanted to reiterate something we already spoke about. So I just mention it again because it's so important to think energy security in a European dimension, and then not go it alone in terms of energy partnerships and LNG purchases. If at all needed, LNG purchases should happen in an EU coordinated way, and they should be flanked with a European push for global demand reduction and a renewable ramp up. And on the domestic side, they should be complemented. They should not be complemented. They should take second place after what's much more important, which is renewables and demand reduction. Very last word on what I think is the likely scenario regarding Russia. I don't think that Germany will surprise us. I think that we will, I mean, I'm very hesitant to make this prediction, but I think from how Russia has acted until now, I really think that their strategy is to inflict as much damage as possible until the point, but not beyond, where then Europe or Germany would walk away. And I believe that they will try to continue doing this as long as possible over the next winter. And our question is then the question that Germany and the EU have to ask themselves: how do we counter this strategy? In the short term, an EU bias cartel could be a possibility, but we need to find an answer. Otherwise, we will be played until we are continuing to transfer revenues to Gazprom for less and less gas that hurts us, that is financing the Russian state. We need to find an answer to that. I think it's pretty clear that Russia will continue doing this, and it will be the task of Germany and other key EU member states to find an answer.
Thank you very much. Annika, would you like to add something?
Sure, just some very general remarks. We organized at EPC, we organized sometime a discussion on Green Deal as a solution to the crisis of our times. And I think this message really needs to get across, is that while we need shift responses to the increasing energy prices and to the disruptions in supply chains, this is not the time for short-sighted decisions, policies, and investments. And what we should be doing in this point in time is really use the Green Deal as the guiding light to help us accelerate, not slow down, accelerate the needed transition to a system, including an energy system that we actually want, which is good for people, business, and the planet. And we've discussed about the urgency on energy savings in a medium term. Obviously, we want, for example, ensure that the Fit for 55 package gets us on that right track. So including the higher renewables and energy efficiency targets will be needed for that. We need Germany to collaborate with other member states in achieving shared goals. It is really important to push aside short-sighted, short-term national interests in order to achieve our joint goals if we want this to deliver. And just to say that obviously, taking that the war is happening, we need to have that wartime mentality being reflected also in the leadership in Germany, that this is exceptional times and that we need exceptional measures, and we need to mobilize our societies to support these exceptional measures that will be required. Thanks.
So thank you all very, very much for this interesting debate, for the critical assessment of the actions of the German government, but for also adding some positive notes to it. Thank you for joining us, listening in. The EPC will surely closely follow all the developments, and so please stay tuned for our future events and hope to see you soon. Have all a lovely end of the day. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.